dismisses.
It ignores it. Yeah? And the only time the average person in a relationship listens to anything is when it's desperate. Right? Now, I've learned through this prior experience is that, okay, waiting till desperation is selfish. And I'm definitely wrong then. I'm definitely wrong if I'm waiting to solve an issue by getting to a point of desperation. I am definitely out of harmony with God's love then. Because if I'm in harmony with God's love, I'd want to solve it. I wouldn't want to delay. I wouldn't want to put it off.
And I have a comment there, like, I understand what you were saying about desperation, which is sort of the way most people experience desperation. But it also feels to me that once your desire, your loving desire grows, you don't have to have, you sort of talk about responding to external pressure and feeling desperate. But if your loving desire really grows, or your sincere desire grows, it feels desperate even when there's no external pressure, doesn't it?
Not really.
Or
no.
like it feels urgent? Is
urgent,
that the right word?
urgent
That's
is the best way of putting it. Yeah. Not desperate, urgent. It's sort of like, no, this is an issue of love that's out of harmony inside me. And to my mind, if I recognise one, it's urgent, I address it. I need to address it, right? And sometimes Mary and I have got a lot of pressures and different things going, like with the prep for this trip. But you're gonna have to put a priority on dealing with the problem first, right? So quite often I say to them, we need to get a couple of days away from people. I need to deal with this problem, this problem that I can notice in myself that needs to be addressed. Because if I don't, it's just going to get worse, right? And I don't want it to get worse. I want it to get better, right? So it's very important that I have a sense of urgency in at least developing a desire to deal with it. Right? Most people do the opposite of that. They go, oh, it's just another thing to worry about or think about. Can I just delay it longer, like, can I put it off for longer? Now, as you've probably realised in your own life by now, for the majority of you, if you put something off longer, does it generally solve itself? No.
It gets worse.
It just gets worse, yes. So obviously we haven't learnt that lesson yet if we keep putting things off, right? Procrastination on a problem is one of the worst things you can do with a problem, because it's just going to get worse and get worse and worse and worse. And to the point, see, problems often start as spiritual problems, then they turn into emotional problems, and then they become physical problems. So if I can recognise the spiritual problem, then the emotional problem won't develop. If I deal with the problem emotionally, the emotional problem won't develop. And if I can recognise the spiritual problem, I will never have a physical problem. Ever. Right? Make sense? Yep, Ivana, you want to ask? So just here.
Hang on, am I supposed to hold it here? So what is the difference between a spiritual problem and an emotional one though?
A spiritual problem is a problem associated with a lack of love. So it's to do with love, truth, humility or faith. That's a spiritual problem.
But isn't that also an emotional problem?
Well, it's caused by emotional problems, oftentimes. But in itself, it doesn't have to be. So an example of that is a Mon and a man had no emotional problems. And they began their problems, right? They made decisions, not based on emotions, to actually go against God's law on purpose. And many times, by the way, many of you do that. Many times you don't have a problem until you make a spiritual decision to go against God's laws. And then the problem starts manifesting itself. So you can actually have no emotional problems and still create one by actually creating a spiritual problem first.
Just by choosing to do something out of harmony with love, do you mean?
Yeah, correct. Out of harmony with love, truth, faith or humility, yes, you can cause problems. Obviously out of harmony with law, That's the real principle, isn't it? Because God's laws define how your body works. They define how your emotional body works, if you can call it that. Your spirit. They define how your spirit body works. They define how your soul works. So if any time you live out of harmony with those laws, things are going to break. Things are going to break down. And one of the things we've got, if we can come to terms with the fact that if I have a spiritual problems and I can solve it, I won't develop an emotional or a physical one. But the trouble is, right from our childhood, we've been educated to accept spiritual falsity, to accept spiritual error right from our childhood. So the problem is we've been indoctrinated and brainwashed.
I think I'm still finding it difficult to understand the difference between a spiritual issue and an emotional one.
Well, I would say most people on the planet are finding it difficult to understand the difference. But if I can define a spiritual issue as every time you are out of harmony with love, right? The problem is, from childhood, you've been indoctrinated as to what love is, and that is completely different to what God's view of love is. So that's the real problem. The real problem is, how do I separate what God's view of love is from what I think love is? Right? Our spiritual problems begin by having a difference between what God's view is and what your view is. That's where a spiritual problem begins. So an example of that is, most of you believe that in a situation where somebody feels uncomfortable, you should make them comfortable. Now that is a spiritual problem in you, because actually their feelings are their feelings, and from God's perspective they need to have them, and it's not your role to make somebody else comfortable. You can give the gift of providing comfort to them, but providing comfort when they demand it would actually be an unloving act.
And I personally feel responsible for other people's emotions, and I also feel like I've got the opposite of that, where I feel like other people are responsible.
Should be responsible for yours too. That's right. And these are definitions of love. You could say they're spiritual problems that began in your childhood, and now you're acting in them emotionally. So because the belief says, if somebody's got a problem, I need to fix it, or if I've got a problem, they need to fix it. That's the belief. Because that belief exists, I'm going to act in a certain way emotionally in the situation. But if that belief didn't exist, can you see you wouldn't act that way?
But from what you were saying before, do you mean that I could choose, like even if I didn't have that belief?
No, you can choose to deal with the belief.
Oh, no.
So let's use that example of Anna. So you've got this spiritual problem where you believe I'm responsible for other people's emotions, and other people are responsible for me, for mine. So there's the spiritual problem, and that's going to have to change, and it's going to have to change emotionally. But if you look at your life, there's other emotional problems now in your life, aren't there?
That are caused by that.
That are caused by that spiritual problem.
Hang on, can you give me an example?
Anger. Lots and lots of anger. You know you have lots of anger, and it's very hard for you to deal with. Yeah. You judge the anger, but also it feels to be never ending. Yeah.
Even now you're feeling angry hearing this.
Like, do I?
Yeah. Oh. But anyway,
all of your anger, you could call that's an emotional problem. It's bad for your relationships. It's bad for you.
Friendships.
Your friendships. Bad for how you feel at home, sitting there, work. All the interactions you have with yourself and others is all flavoured by this anger based on that spiritual problem.
But the spiritual problem began first.
Yeah.
And then the anger comes afterwards.
Oh, I'm just finding this so hard for some reason.
Yeah,
because most people find it hard because they don't want to believe that their emotional problems come from their spiritual problems.
Because you sort of feel like, I've just got this thing with anger, but you don't really want to solve the cause of it, the spiritual problem.
Yeah, for some reason I'm just really having a hard time with the spiritual part, separating the two. It's almost like
can you see if you didn't have those beliefs, you wouldn't have your anger? Can you see that?
So the beliefs.
If you didn't have the belief that other people should make your feelings go away for you when you feel uncomfortable, can you see you wouldn't have any demand on other people to do that, and therefore when they didn't do that, you wouldn't be upset?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And you wouldn't have this angry feeling coming out, everyone, take it away, take it away.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't also feel resentful, like, oh man, I just feel like I'm always doing things for other people and I'm trying to make them comfortable and I'm sick of it.
And the alternative also is, let's say, Ulf has a demand on Ivana. If you didn't have a feeling of a belief that you had to now pander to the man who was demanding, can you see you wouldn't pander to him? But also you wouldn't be angry that you did afterwards either.
Because often you're angry after, there's another emotional problem you've got from having the spiritual belief that I have to pander to the demanding man.
Yeah, but then it gets tiring and you get exhausted.
So you end up with an additional problem, which is, I resent men. I'm blocked men, I hate men.
Yeah, men demand this from me all the time and they're bastards because they demand it from me.
They're just all like it. They're all like it. Yeah. It's nothing to do with me.
Many of them are.
Yeah, but you don't see the spiritual problem, which is I don't have to meet the demands of men.
I don't have to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because with my work, so as a disability support worker, I've noticed that like when I'm around other support workers and we're all working together sort of for a bunch of other clients with disabilities, it's like whenever any of the clients will say something, I feel like I've got to respond like straight away. But I've noticed that other support workers, they just won't even answer anything.
That's right. This is what I'm saying is the injury is playing out in the spiritual problem is playing out in all of these emotional ways everywhere in your life. But if you could deal with the spiritual problem, all the things that happen emotionally would all disappear. Right? So then the real question becomes, well, like, if I can deal with the spiritual problem first, then I've got a good chance of resolving a lot of emotional problems that result because I didn't deal with the spiritual problem first. But see, the majority of people on earth don't think this way. And it's taken me, in the first century I realised this quite early because I didn't have a lot of addictions. Now it took me 40 years, like I said, to come to the conclusion again in this life, I need to be dealing with my spiritual problems, not my emotional or physical ones. Right?
I'm still stuck on that.
I know. Because what I see from most people on earth is they want to deal with the physical one, so health issue, want to deal with that, don't want to see how it got created, don't want to change their behaviour that are driven by their emotions, don't want to do anything, they just want to solve the physical problem. This is why the average person takes medication, because it's a physical solution seemingly physical solution for a physical problem. And then they don't have to take the effort to deal with the spiritual or emotional one. They get away with it. There's the illusion, of course, of it, because like I've seen so many people die of cancer since I've known them, and that's because at the end of the day they didn't want to deal with the spiritual problem. And it's got nothing to do with anything else other than refusing to deal with the spiritual problem. And so, what I'm saying is the process I went through, Ivana, and it is a process you will have to go through too, if you want to have a relationship with God in particular, is that you come to realise, I need to be able to know what a spiritual problem is, and I need to be able to deal with it somehow. I need to be able to deal with it somehow. And if I can deal with that with gusto, with passion, with desire, first, I will never have an emotional or a physical problem. Right? Now, like I said, that's tricky initially because you've been brought up to view your current spiritual outlook on life, which is all based upon your definition of love, is completely flawed because you've been educated in a flawed system. So the flawed system began with your family, but not in your family like your mum and dad. I mean your family like generations ago family. Like hundreds of years ago family. It began back there for many of us, and it was continued by your education as a child, your actual school education. It was continued by the education from society, by your job, by university, if you went to university. If you didn't, it's continued by your work life. and everything right till you got to this point. And the entire thing of it, the entire structure is flawed with regard to love. So it is understandable that now you don't really know what love is, isn't it? It's really understandable given that background. But do you want to know what love is the key.
Well, if I answer that, I feel like no.
That's right.
That's why you're finding the conversation hard.
That's why you're finding conversation hard. Because the reality is a lot of people go, I'm sick of the whole... Like, when we start discussing problems, the average person goes, I just want you to solve my physical one.
Yeah, well, that's how I feel like with my arthritis and stuff. Like, I've felt so... Because it's just continuously getting worse and worse.
Of course.
You know,
which it will continue to do.
Yeah, and like I've felt what you described before about, you know, coming to this place of, what did you say before? Like
desperation.
Yeah, the desperation.
Yep.
So sometimes I'm in that much pain. I
You're
find
desperate.
it. Yeah, and it's like I still don't feel like I believe in God, to be honest. So, but I will be like angry towards God, the God that I don't believe in, because I feel like I've been, you know, praying about what's causing it, but I'm obviously not listening, or maybe I'm not even getting shown because I don't really want to.
You don't want to know the spiritual problem.
Yeah.
The issue with love.
Yeah.
And this is the average person on earth doesn't want to. This is why the pharmaceutical industry is one of the main industries making huge profits. Is because they've learnt that most people on earth don't want to solve the problem in a truthful manner, and they don't want to have to go through the effort of doing so. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide a drug that numbs them to the problem, and they provide the drugs that numbs people to the problem, but of course they all cause lots of other problems.
Yeah, well, I haven't been taking medication for mine, but it's getting to the point where my hands are becoming so
seizing up
deformed
and painful,
that and like even my toes and stuff,
Yeah.
and it's really stressing me out
Yeah.
because like if I don't know, I've had doctors tell me, like they're warning me about, you know, how if it's almost like the medication is not going to reverse what's already happened.
Of course.
Well, that's what they say.
Well,
and
that's
then
true.
It's just going to slow down the progression of it.
That's true. It's going to numb you to the progression of it.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of the medication.
And it might act in a small way on your physical body.
Yeah.
But because the spiritual problem is still there.
Yeah.
And the refusal to address the spiritual problem.
And the ongoing emotional problems as a result of the spiritual problem. The physical problem, it's just like acting on the very end thing.
The physical problem is inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And partly what's stopping your progress is you haven't yet dealt with the God issue. Because if you dealt with the God issue, you might have actually started going, there are spiritual problems.
Yeah.
See, if you don't deal with the God issue, then you're the arbiter and controller.
I don't know what that means.
Well, you're the person who controls your own life.
Yeah.
See, a person who deals with some spiritual problems gets to the point where he reckons that I don't control my own life, God does. In the sense that God has defined the laws that I live by. And if I'm out of harmony with those laws, which I can choose to be, I'm going to have problems. And at this stage, because you don't really believe in God in your heart, you don't really believe that there's somebody who's made a law. And you don't, you see what I'm saying?
Okay. So
you don't really believe there are spiritual problems.
Sure. So I can just do whatever I want, sort of thing.
Sort of thing, yeah.
And if you've got a problem, you've kind of got to
You've got to solve it.
Well,
and if you've got a physical problem, there's no such thing as a spiritual cause.
Yeah, and it's a really crappy place, like, because
Of course.
Like, I just feel really terrible because I feel like whenever I pray to God, or because I just don't believe that God exists, it's almost like I'm just praying to nothing.
Well, you are, because you've got to resolve the does God exist question, and so my suggestion would be, Ivana, forget about your physical problem for a moment. Resolve the God exists question.
Well, since I came last week and you were saying, like, what did you say? There's I keep forgetting what you said, but like there's so much proof that God exists, and I've been praying since then. I'm like, show me. How do you prove? Because I'm like, I don't believe it. You know, if I look at nice plants and stuff that's outside, I think, oh, well, you know, someone had to have created them, designed them, and like animals and stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I think I really do need to
spend more time on that issue.
Yeah.
Now, if you spend more time on that issue of resolving that question, then you'll come to realise shortly after that actually spiritual problems exist. Mm-hmm. And if spiritual problems exist, you can ask questions like, this is what I did in the first century. I asked God questions about, okay, I see people like they're blind and they're lame, and there's like, back then there was a lot of leprosy and things like that where their skin was getting eaten away. These people were in such bad shape physically, and I'm going, what's the cause of this? Given I know God enough, by that stage I knew God enough to know that God only creates a perfect thing. So how does it come about that a person's own flesh is falling off?
Well, and that's like with working with people with disabilities.
Correct.
Like I've been thinking back to some things that you've said in like previous seminars and stuff. Not that I can really remember them that well, but it's like I find it really interesting how like even families, they can have multiple children with, they might have had 3 or 4 children, all with similar disabilities. And I don't know, and I feel like...
And why does that happen to some families and not others?
Yeah, and then...
So there's obviously some scientific link.
Yeah.
And this is, and if you discount the spiritual and you discount the emotional, scientists have been looking physically for these links for years and years and years and years, and in the end they've come down to it's genetics, right? But why does sometimes then that's not true? So for a proper cause to be found, it has to be consistent, and the fact scientifically this is true. It has to be consistent. If it's not consistent cause and effect, then obviously the cause isn't the cause. And so most people, because they want to discount God's existence, they want to discount God's laws exist, they want to discount there is spiritual problems, they want to discount even that there's emotional ones. Now, the only way they can solve any problem is by looking at something physically. And it's very rudimentary. Like I often think of the world today, people are so enamoured in the world today by science. They think, wow, we've progressed so far, and isn't it amazing how much we've progressed in science? And, we've got these devices we carry around on our wrist even now that you can talk in and store things in. And, you've got devices that monitor your heart rate and everything while you're walking and how many paces you've done. And, there's these devices everywhere now that think technology is amazing. And I go, it's so rudimentary, this technology we have today, because it doesn't address anything emotionally or anything spiritually. So it is bound to be rudimentary. And as a result, you look at the problems we have today. Cancer is worse now than it's ever been per population. Mental health issues are the highest per capita than they've ever been. Breakdowns are the highest per capita than they've ever been. And physical illnesses, for the most part, there's new physical illnesses being diagnosed that have never been diagnosed historically, and not because of a lack of indications, because for the most part they didn't exist. Why is it that the world is getting so sick when we've got so much tech? And it's not because of 5G or anything like that. It's not because of the tech. It's because the tech isn't around surrounding anything to do with our emotional or our spiritual welfare. It's all about the physical. The focus on the physical is intense. The whole reason why you're not really sure whether you believe in God or not at this stage is because your whole life you've been educated God doesn't exist. No spiritual, in other words. Look, You think of your family,
Yeah.
no spiritual.
Yeah.
The beliefs are no spiritual. They don't even believe there's laws like universal laws. They believe there's government laws because I've grown up with them. But there's no concept about there being universal laws that govern your body, universal laws that govern your life, universal laws that govern your soul. They don't even believe a soul exists. So how can you believe there's universal laws governing it if you don't even believe the soul exists? The problem with all of this is now I'm looking for the solution to my physical problem with a physical solution. When the problem, and what I've just said, all of my physical problems, every single one of them, including me growing old and dying, is a result of a spiritual problem. Now, if I'm chucking away the whole spiritual problem as a concept altogether, not even considering it at all, how am I ever going to discover the cause?
You're not.
You're not.
Well, I'm not.
Oh, that's
and
right.
it's like my my dad's partner Kim. She's also got arthritis, but hers is a different type.
Yeah.
And she's always trying to give me advice, but she's got
Physical advice.
yeah.
But also, Ivana's saying she's got the same problem.
Yeah,
That's right.
she's got the same problem.
Yeah. Now,
yeah.
Isn't that interesting attraction?
With my dad's partner, do you mean?
Yeah. You're your dad's daughter, your dad's partner, and both of you have a similar problem.
I have nobody else thought that probably about that before.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, see, if it was me in this position, I'd be going,
Maybe something to do with it.
There's got to be
It
something.
doesn't matter that it's
It depends.
a
Is
different
hers
type of
osteoarthritis?
No, so hers is rheumatoid. I've been told mine is psoriatic arthritis, like related to my psoriasis.
Yeah, but
No,
all
it's
forms of
similar,
arthritis have similar causes.
Sure.
Obviously slightly different given the types of arthritis, but for the most part they've got similar causes. So what do you feel when you've got arthritis?
Very angry. Like
that's not. I'm saying in your body, what do you feel?
in my body, like as in when I'm moving around. Do you
Do you feel pain?
Yeah.
Do you feel
Yeah,
aches?
pain,
Do you feel
like stiff, very slow to move, like initially at least.
Restricted, under control, isn't it? Isn't that what you feel?
Yeah.
Something other than you is controlling you.
Other
Your body is controlling you, and you're not controlling your body. Your movement is restricted, is it not?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like I can't run.
It's like you're in a
anymore.
prison.
Yeah.
Inside of your own
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
You can't do the things you would like to do.
Yeah.
Your body is creating a prison for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd go back emotionally now and go, well, that's an interesting thing. My body is exhibiting a case where I can't move my body. So it's like my body's putting me in a prison now, emotionally. What might I feel emotionally that I'm ignoring that would cause my body to exhibit this particular problem?
Well, I feel like.
Ivana, I don't want to hear your stories.
Sure. No.
What? No. Can I say?
Yeah.
I'm putting these
Yeah.
things to you
To ask myself.
to ask yourself.
Sure. Yeah.
Yep. So this is a part. It's an education process, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is say, okay, I've heard from Jesus. This guy who thinks he's Jesus, because obviously if God doesn't exist, he's not Jesus, right? but
or Jesus is just like whatever.
But this guy who thinks he's Jesus is telling me there's spiritual problems. He's also telling me there's emotional problems, and he's also telling me there's physical problems, and he's telling me that these physical problems come from emotional issues, and the emotional issues come from spiritual beliefs. That's what he's fundamentally saying to me. So discount the fact that he says he's Jesus, which makes him a bit crazy. Is there a possibility, right, that there is more to what I can see in the world and what I know in the world physically that is causing my problems? And if there is, how would I investigate that? How would I go about discovering? Now, one of the things I just said is an important part of the discovery, and that is, okay, the girl who's with my dad has got the same problem. I'm my dad's daughter. I've got the same problem. Well, there's a good indicator of, that there's something like the girl who's with your dad. She hasn't got a genetic issue with your dad. You do, because you come from your dad's line, so part of your genetics is your dad's. But she doesn't. She's not related to your dad.
But your dad
Well,
is
hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
Just being silly.
Well, if she is, it was way, way back, like probably 100,000 years ago or so, whatever.
But your dad is attracted to her, or he was at one time attracted to her.
Yeah.
So there's things in him that he likes there to be in a woman, and you
That are in you, and
that you obviously his child, and you would have felt from him, what makes a good? How do I get dad's approval? And obviously there's things that he
and
prefers.
this woman obviously does the same.
And that's why he's attracted to this woman, because she has some of those things.
Yeah. And maybe those things are what causes you to feel in a prison.
And restricted.
Does that make sense? And restricted. But what belief in you causes you that you have to, fundamentally do something that Dad feels is right to do? There's got to be other things going on there as to why you believe you've got to do what Dad wants you to do, or what Dad believes is right to do. Right? Because now it's in you. The belief of what he thinks is right is now part of what you think is right. Right? So is it that belief, and I'm saying it is that belief, that is causing the emotional restrictions in you, that cause you to do the things you do emotionally, that then cause you to exhibit a physical problem? Because the belief is the issue of love that isn't solved, and that belief, while it exists, will drive you emotionally, and those things that you do emotionally are going to actually cause damage to your physical body. That's what I'm saying. Now, the average person on earth doesn't believe that, of course, but that's why nobody's solving their problems, right? Because the average person on earth doesn't believe it. What I see happening on earth is every person who's ever had arthritis they've managed it, but they've never cured it, right? Every person that has cancer, the only time they cure it is when it gets removed. Like physically, operation, cut, taken out. Very rare to see a person who doesn't have that happen not die from cancer, right? Very rare. So why is this? It's because we're not seeing the spiritual problem. Yep. Now, for Ivana to believe there's a spiritual problem, she's going to have to resolve the God issue. Yep. And that somebody else defines love, not Ivana. She's going to have to see that at some point. Somebody else defines what is right and wrong, good or bad, or what is loving, in other words. And it's not Ivana. It's somebody else. You follow? At the moment, Ivana wants it to be Ivana. Can you see that? You do want it to be Ivana. And to be frank, the average person on earth wants it to be themselves too, So unless I resolve that issue, and this is why in the end, a lot of our problems come back to the God issue, right? Because in the end, if God exists, and this is my thoughts in the first century, because this is exactly what I thought. If God exists, then God knows the truth about everything, right? And if he does know the truth about everything, all I need to do is ask him. And then I'll know the truth about everything.
And that's pretty hard when you don't believe that God exists.
Impossible.
That's been my problem. It's like I've been trying to pray about something, but then...
That's right.
Because I don't believe God exists.
Unless you've fundamentally resolved that question, you are going to be consigned to dealing with your physical problems in a physical manner. And that's reality.
Yeah, and that doesn't even work anyway.
This is what you're finding.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. If we talked about this 15 years ago when you didn't have arthritis, then you might have felt differently, right? You might have gone, I can just ignore that. But now that you do have arthritis, the physical problem is so intense at times that it's causing you to ponder whether you're right on the subject of God or not.
Do you mean that because I feel like God doesn't exist. Is that what?
Yeah, but now you're having to contemplate: is that true? Like, what if God does exist, and what if Jesus, this guy who says he's Jesus, is saying is right? Look, what if my arthritis comes from a spiritual problem? Because I've tried all the physical things, and they haven't worked. So perhaps I need to start addressing something that I haven't addressed before, and that is the spiritual issues. And your spiritual issues begin with one thing, and that is, does God exist or not?
Mm.
Right? And there's a number of others here, actually, who have their spiritual issues beginning with the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it's not an uncommon thing. There's many people who are Christian who don't believe God exists, by the way. They think they do, but emotionally they don't believe. Right? So a belief has to be an emotional thing, not a physical thing, and not an intellectual thing. So it really is about how do I emotionally resolve whether God exists or not. And how do I emotionally come to feel God does exist is really the question, isn't it? There. Yep. If you don't resolve that question, you're going to go to the state where you go, okay, if God doesn't exist, then basically I'm my own lawmaker. And if I'm my own lawmaker, then I just got to choose to do what I think is right.
And that's what I do.
That's what I do.
And even when I have some sort of feeling that things are not right, I still do them anyway.
That's right. That's right. I don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I go, no, God is, I know God exists, I can feel God. I know God exists. I also know God has laws, I want to live by them. And I want to, and like I said to Paul, for me, my whole heart, my whole soul, my whole strength, my whole life is dedicated to that goal. And I know, and from experience now too, obviously, but I know that by doing that, the rest of my life works out as a result of that. But that has only come about by me first, many years ago, 2,000 years ago, over 2,000 years ago, resolving, does God exist? I had to resolve that first.
And that must feel like a pretty different place to be in, to have that in your heart, because I often feel like such a cold person, almost like I don't have a heart, not just towards other people, but I don't know, just because I feel like God doesn't exist, so it's just with me.
No, I understand.
Try to imagine what it might feel like for you.
Well, it's really good because there's a number of things it feels like, but one of the things is that God is certain about everything. And what I've learned in my own life is, I'm so uncertain about a lot of things when it's just me trying to work something out by myself. You can look at any situation almost and there's 10 different possible answers, you know what I mean, like what to do. And for me, it's sort of like, well, you do the most loving one now. So that simplifies my life a lot. Like this, what is the most loving one? That's the one I do. And if none of them are loving, I don't do any of them. That's sort of the approach I take now. But if I didn't have that feeling of certainty, I'd be looking at every problem and I'd be confused and I'd be distressed, probably most of the time knowing myself, and knowing how much I think about things. And, I'd be worried all the time and concerned and still not working out what to do. At the end of the day, I'd probably end up being quite a big procrastinator, probably.
That's like me.
Well, I understand, because it'd probably be how I'd end up too if I didn't have a direction that I could be certain about. Then what's the point of taking any direction is sort of how I would see it. And so, it helps me out with a lot of areas of my life as to what is the right thing to do in any situation. But it has only come about by resolving those fundamental questions. That makes sense, Simone? Yep.